At my own wedding, someone leaned over the row of white chairs and asked, "Which seats are for your parents?" I didn't even look up. There weren't any. The air tightened like everyone suddenly realized something was wrong. Somewhere behind me, a fork clinked against a glass too loud for the soft music playing under the string lights. I could feel Henry watching me steady as ever. And Lily, she had no idea this moment was coming. None of them did. My name is Ethan Cole. I'm 30, and everything you're about to hear is the reason those seats stayed empty. And trust me, this story doesn't start here. It starts with a betrayal much colder than this night. My name is Ethan Cole, and before the wedding, before the empty seats, before I learned what real family actually looks like, I was just a kid trying to breathe inside a house that kept shrinking around me. I grew up in a quiet neighborhood where every driveway looked the same and every porch light flickered the same tired yellow glow at night. From the outside, we looked like a picture-perfect family. On the inside, it felt like I was always holding my breath. My childhood was split in half before Noah and after Noah. Before Noah died, everything felt lighter. He lived 3 houses down, skinny kid, chipped glasses, messy hair, always chewing on the end of a plastic straw because it helped him think. We biked everywhere, convinced our legs were engines, and the cracked pavement was our racetrack. Summers were long and loud. Winters were slow, but still ours. At night, we'd sit cross-legged in front of an old TV in his basement, eating dollar store pizza rolls, arguing about which video game ending was better. One night, when the basement smelled like damp carpet and old soda, he nudged me with his shoulder and said, "Dude, no matter what happens, I'm not going anywhere. I'll always be here." I didn't know then how cruel that sentence would feel later. The day he died, the air felt wrong before anyone said a word. Sirens echoed somewhere in the distance, far but close enough that your stomach knew before your brain did. Adults whispered in half sentences, fragmented pieces that didn't add up, accident, intersection. Both parents. No survivors. I kept waiting for someone to say the wrong names to tell me they'd mix things up. But they didn't. And nobody ever sat me down to explain anything. They assumed I'd figure it out. I did, just not the way they wanted. For weeks after Noah's empty bike sat leaned against our garage, dust gathered on the handlebars. I couldn't bring myself to touch it or move it. It felt like the last true thing in a house full of polite lies. My parents didn't know what to do with grief, especially mine. Mark liked solutions, fixes speeches. Karen liked pretending everything was fine if it made her look strong in front of friends. Lily, being younger, didn't fully understand, but she understood one thing perfectly: the more attention I got, the less she had. A few days after the funeral, which I wasn't allowed to attend because Karen said kids shouldn't see things like that, we had a family dinner. A forced, suffocating dinner meant to bring us back to normal. Karen cooked roast chicken and mashed potatoes, the house filled with garlic and lemon smells I used to love but couldn't stand that day. The air felt thick, like grief had weight. I sat quietly staring at my plate, trying to swallow thoughts that felt too sharp to speak. When I finally opened my mouth, just one sentence about how strange it felt not seeing Noah's bike in his driveway, Karen slammed her fork down. "Ethan, enough. We're trying to have a positive evening." Mark didn't even look up from cutting his chicken. A real man knows when to push his emotions aside. "Your sister had an amazing week at school. Let's talk about that." Lily's smile stretched a little too wide, almost rehearsed. I felt something inside me fold. Not break yet, just bend. That bend would crack later. School wasn't better. His empty chair was a punch to the ribs every morning. The cafeteria sounded wrong without his laugh. Teachers pulled me aside with the same practice tone. "Are you managing okay?" I told them yes because the alternative meant them calling my parents. And my parents? They didn't want messy. They didn't want complicated. They wanted a clean story. I tried to keep up, but every hallway felt haunted. Every test felt pointless. My grades slipped. My motivation drowned. And home wasn't somewhere I could land safely. It was a stage where I played the role of problem child, the foil to Lily's golden darling. Years later, when relatives would say, "Oh, Ethan was always difficult," I'd think back to those days, not difficult, just invisible. I didn't know it yet, But everything that came after every explosion, every wound, every betrayal started there at that dinner table with cold chicken and warm lies. Everything shifted the month I turned 15. Not suddenly, not with one big explosion, but with 1,000 small ones that eventually hollowed me out. The first was silence. Not the peaceful kind you get on a porch at night, but the suffocating kind that fills your lungs like smoke. I stopped talking at home unless someone asked me something directly, and even then the words scraped their way out. Karen noticed, but only enough to make it about her. One night she stood in my doorway, arms crossed, perfume thick and sweet, like she'd just come home from a dinner with friends. "You're dragging the whole house down," she said softly in that voice she used when she wanted to sound wounded. "Your sister feels tense around you. I feel tense. We're all trying to move forward, Ethan. Move forward." While I felt stuck in cement. Mark tried a different approach. He'd catch me at the bottom of the stairs or in the kitchen and pull out one of his trademark monologues. "You're going down the wrong path. Life doesn't hand out pity. Discipline makes a man. Your sister understands that." He always ended with a comparison to Lily, always. And Lily. She soaked every word in like validation. Sometimes she'd walk past my room stop and lean on the doorframe with crossed arms. "I don't get how we're related," she'd say, shaking her head slowly like she was talking to someone broken beyond repair. Every comment carved a deeper line. I didn't implode all at once. I drifted. School became noise. Homework felt like static. And I found a group of kids who didn't ask questions, kids who didn't care if I was hurting or angry or empty. They didn't ask why I didn't want to go home. They didn't expect me to pretend everything was fine. We did dumb things. Skate at the mall parking lot after closing light leftover fireworks behind the grocery store, sneak into construction sites just to feel adrenaline push the heaviness away. None of it solved anything, but it numbed things long enough to sleep at night. The night everything snapped wasn't even dramatic. We were messing around behind a strip mall pretending to film a trick video with a beat-up skateboard when the police cruiser rolled in. The lights flashed red and blue over the concrete, catching us mid-laugh. My stomach dropped before the officer even stepped out. They didn't arrest us, just took us in and held us until parents arrived. But it was enough. Mark and Karen walked into the station like disappointed celebrities. Karen covered her mouth with both hands the moment she saw me. "Oh my God. Ethan, how could you do this? To us, to them." Mark didn't shout. He didn't have to. His silence was worse. He shook his head slowly, jaw tight, as if he'd known this was coming all along. The ride home was a blur of Karen crying, and Mark lecturing, his voice a low rumble that didn't match the pounding in my chest. By the time we pulled into the driveway, something in me already knew I was done fighting for space in that house. The next morning, before I even sat up in bed, Mark appeared in the doorway. His tone was business-like cold. "You'll pack today. You're going to stay with your grandparents for a while. They can straighten you out." Karen stood behind him, arms wrapped around herself like she was bracing against a storm. "This is for your own good," she added. "We can't keep living like this." Lily stood further down the hall, leaning against the wall with a small, satisfied smirk. I didn't cry. I didn't protest. I remember looking at the sunlight hitting the carpet and thinking it felt too warm for what was happening. Like the world didn't notice a family was quietly cutting off one of its limbs. When we drove down the long dirt road to Henry and Margaret's farm, I kept my eyes on the rearview mirror. Mark didn't say anything. Karen dabbed her eyes occasionally, even though she hadn't shed a real tear since we left the police station. I watched the neighborhood shrink behind us Noah's house, the swing set we used to launch ourselves off the street where he taught me how to fix a slipped bike chain. When we pulled up to the farm, the gravel crunched under the tires. The barn doors were open, sunlight hitting the dust inside like floating gold. Henry stepped out, wiping his hands on a rag. No judgment, no sigh, just a steady gaze. "Come on," he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You're home now." Those 3 words cracked something open inside me in a way punishment never had. Mark didn't come inside. He stood by the car, arms crossed, pretending he was doing the noble thing. "Don't make them regret this," he said. I didn't answer. I just watched their car disappear down the road, dust swirling in their wake. I didn't know it then, but that was the true beginning not of my downfall, but of the life that would eventually save me. Life at the farm didn't fix me overnight, but it gave me something I'd never had before: room to breathe. Henry and Margaret didn't hover, didn't preach, didn't twist every mistake into a moral lecture. They showed me what quiet stability looked like, and that stability became the very thing my old life couldn't stand. My first months there were awkward. I'd flinch when someone raised their voice, even if it was just Henry yelling at the radio for static. I'd tense when Margaret asked if I'd eaten, waiting for the guilt trip that never came. And Jack was a different kind of man than Mark. He worked silently, shoulders, steady movements, purposeful. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't need to. He could see I wasn't. One morning, after watching me fumble with a fence latch for the third time, he took the tool from my hand. "You're trying too hard," he said. "Slow down." He fixed it in 3 seconds, then handed me the tool back. "Do it again, no judgment, no lecture, just a quiet expectation that I could learn." And for the first time in years, I wanted to meet that expectation. But the peace didn't last. 3 weeks and Karen called Margaret. I was in the hallway when the call came through. Margaret answered with her usual warm tone, but I could hear Karen's theatrics through the receiver. "I can't sleep," she said dramatically. "Does he ask about us? Does he resent us?" Margaret didn't play into it. "He's settling in." Karen sniffed loudly. "You don't understand what we've been through. He put us through hell." I stopped breathing for a second. "Hell," she called my grief. "Hell." Margaret's voice cooled. "He's 15, Karen. He lost his friend." There was a pause. Then Karen snapped, voice raised. "Don't make excuses for him. He's always been like this." I walked away before the call ended. That was the first cut. The second came a month later through a cousin's text. "Your mom said you refused to stay in your own home, so they let you go live with your grandparents. She said she cried for days." I stared at that message until the words blurred. Refused to stay, cried for days. They had rewritten the entire situation in record time, turning their decision into my rejection. Their story traveled faster than the truth ever could. I didn't respond. I just went outside and helped Jack unload bales of hay until my arms felt like they'd split open. Sometimes physical pain was easier to handle than emotional lies, but things only escalated. On Thanksgiving that year, Henry and Margaret insisted I stay home and rest after a long morning of chores. They planned to go to a small family gathering a few miles away. I stayed behind thinking it would be a quiet day. It wasn't. By the time Henry and Margaret returned, their expressions were tight, unusually stiff. Margaret set down the casserole dish with more force than she meant to. Henry sat at the table, jaw clenched. "What happened?" I asked. Margaret wiped her hands on a towel. "Lily was talking. In my family, that word didn't mean speaking. It meant performing." Henry let out a long, tired breath. "She told everyone we're exhausted because of you, that we're dealing with them until you grow up." My stomach dropped. I do everything here every day." "We know," Margaret said, "but they don't care about truth." Henry finally looked at me and anger flashed in his eyes. Not at me, but for me. "Your father just sat there letting her talk." Karen nodded, like they were proud. It was the first time I saw Henry truly angry. The room felt smaller because of it, and I didn't know it then, but that conversation was a spark. One of several that would ignite the explosion years later. When I turned 17, things should have gotten easier. I had rhythm structure work. I passed my classes again. Not flawlessly, but enough to feel like I wasn't sinking anymore. Then Mark showed up at the farm. No warning, no call. I walked into the kitchen after feeding the chickens and found him leaning against the counter like he owned the place. Margaret kept stirring the pot on the stove, her lips pressed tight. Henry sat at the table reading the paper but turning no pages. Mark smiled at me, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Good to see you, son." I didn't respond. He turned to Henry. I think it's important that Ethan understands that improvement doesn't erase what happened. He needs to earn forgiveness. Forgiveness. Like I'd wronged them. Henry put his cup down. Hard. You dropped him off and drove away, he said. We'll handle things our way. Mark lifted both hands like he was being misunderstood. I'm only saying this for his own good. Boys need discipline. Just then Jack walked in. Mark fell silent immediately. Jack looked at him once unimpressed. Well, Jack said, look who remembered this place exists. Mark shifted uncomfortable. I just want what's best for my son. No, Jack said. You want control. The words hit like a hammer. Mark didn't stay much longer after that, but he didn't leave quietly. He paused at the door, looked back at me, and said, don't forget who your real family is. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because in that moment, I finally realized something. Real family doesn't abandon you and then demand gratitude later. Real family shows up. Real family stays. And mine did not. By the time I turned 18, the farm had shaped me into a different person. Not perfect, not whole, but steadier. I woke up before sunrise without anyone yelling me out of bed. I worked because I wanted to, not because someone threatened consequences, and for a while I believed distance might calm my family down. It didn't. They found new ways to crawl back into my life. The first strike came through a Facebook post, one of those dramatic, vague ones Karen loved. A cousin screenshot it for me. Some parents sacrifice everything only to be blamed later. But God knows the truth. The comments were full of relatives praising her strength, her devotion. Nobody knew she was talking about the son she'd shipped off like unwanted furniture. I threw my phone on the bed and went outside to split firewood until I couldn't feel my palms. He's trying, Margaret said softly when she found me outside that night. Who, I asked. Your grandfather. He wants you to see you're not alone. She didn't say anything about Karen's post. She didn't have to. Her silence was its own comfort. But family lies have long legs. The next hit came from Lily. I was in the college library, head buried in a sociology textbook when my phone buzzed again. A message from a cousin. Just a heads up. Lily's been saying you're freeloading at the farm. Freeloading. I'd been waking up at dawn, hauling feed, repairing fences, taking night classes, helping Henry and Jack with every cycle of planting and harvesting. And freeloading was the story she chose to tell. My fingers tightened around the phone until the plastic creaked. I didn't reply. I couldn't trust myself not to explode. That night I showed Jack the message. He read it once, exhaled slowly, and handed it back. She doesn't know anything about this place. Let her talk. But his calm didn't erase the sting. Conflict has a way of building quietly before it erupts, and the eruption came during the holiday season. Henry and Margaret had been invited to a larger family gathering, one that I was deliberately not included in, which suited me fine. I had finals to study for and chores to finish. I was feeding the chickens when my phone rang. It was a cousin, breathless. Dude, your grandfather just went off on people. My stomach dropped. What happened? I don't know who started it. Someone made a comment about you. Something like you should be grateful the family still puts up with you. And Henry slammed his fork down and told everyone to shut up. I froze. He said, and I'm quoting, "You don't get to talk about that boy when you've never lifted a damn finger to help him." The whole room went quiet. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Instead, I slid down to sit on the barn floor, the smell of hay thick around me. Henry didn't defend people lightly. He didn't use words as weapons unless pushed to a breaking point, and they had pushed him. When Henry and Margaret came home that night, they acted like nothing happened. Margaret asked if I'd eaten. Henry hung his coat, washed his hands, and sat at the table with the newspaper. But his silence was sharper than usual, like a blade cooling after being pulled from the fire. I didn't press. I just said, "Thank you." He nodded once. "You work hard. People should know that." But this wasn't the worst. The worst was the voice memo. I was 20 juggling community college classes and farm work when a cousin accidentally forwarded me an audio clip meant for someone else. It was Lily's voice, bubbly and cruel. All I'm saying is, once Grandpa gets too tired to run that place, Dad will step in. And when he does, the farm will be ours. I already have ideas. We could turn the barn into something cute like a rustic event venue. Think of the photos we could take. She laughed. And Ethan, he'll deal. He always does. My chest tightened until I had to lean on the kitchen counter just to breathe. They weren't just spreading lies. Now they were planning for a future built on taking what Henry and Margaret worked for, twisting it into something shallow and commercial. I played that memo for Jack later. He listened without blinking. She doesn't get it, he said. This place isn't a prop. But the real hit was still coming. A few months before I finished community college, Mark showed up at the farm again. He walked into the house like he had some right to be there. I've been thinking, he said, clearing his throat. About the future. About the land. Henry didn't look at him. The land is handled. Mark stiffened. I just want to make sure things are fair. Fair. The word tasted rotten coming from him. He went on. Ethan's still young. He doesn't know how to run things on his own. Maybe we should discuss who handles the property if anything happens to you. Henry finally looked up. His eyes were cold steel. Ethan will handle it. Mark blinked. What, you heard me? I stood in the doorway, frozen, listening to my father realize for the first time that he wasn't the heir to anything, not the property, not the legacy, not the trust. And that was the moment everything snapped for him. He left without saying goodbye, but his desperation didn't stop. It only grew. He started calling Margaret, pretending he wanted to check in. Karen sent long texts about rebuilding the family. Lily wrote captions online about staying strong when siblings turn their backs. Every attempt was a rope they threw, hoping I'd grab it. But I'd already learned something important at the farm. Sometimes survival means cutting the rope. And they felt the sting of that cut more than I expected. The final escalation came the spring I turned 21, when Noah's death anniversary overlapped with a storm that nearly tore the farm apart. Jack strained his back trying to grab a falling beam. Henry and I patched fences for hours in the rain. I worked until my hands bled, until mud covered my knees, until Margaret begged me to rest. And that night, while I sat on the porch, with a cup of bad instant coffee thunder rolling in the distance, my phone buzzed with another message. It was a screenshot of Mark at a family dinner telling everyone sending Ethan to the farm saved his life. We did the hard thing good parents must do. I stared at that sentence so long it burned into my memory. They weren't just rewriting history now. They were handing out copies. And I knew then conflict wasn't something I could outrun. It would follow me, twist me, haunt me, until the day I finally chose to confront it. Everything was leading to that day. The wedding, the empty chairs, and the moment my family finally learned the truth. The afternoon sun slid low over the fields, turning the farm into a warm gold that didn't match the tension building in my chest. The wedding aisle stretched between rows of white chairs Jack had set up that morning, strings of warm lights looping overhead. Margaret's flowers lined each row, lavender and white, smelling like spring after rain. Henry stood near the arch straight-backed, despite his heart trouble, wearing the same pressed shirt he'd worn to every important event in the family. But the chairs, those were the loudest part of the whole scene. 2 empty seats on the left side. Not symbolic, not reserved, just empty. People whispered. I could hear the small breaths, the shifting feet, the question everyone wanted to ask but didn't dare. Where are your parents? Why aren't they here? Did you forget to save them? A spot I didn't forget anything. A hush fell across the guests when the music shifted. Ava stepped out from the farmhouse porch, her dress catching the light, her smile steady and sure. She walked toward me, guided by Henry's arm. His steps were slow, deliberate. Careful, the doctor said he shouldn't strain, but he insisted. Said he'd walk her down the aisle or die trying. When they reached me, Henry handed her off with a nod. You take care of each other, he murmured. Then he looked at me with something fierce and proud burning behind his eyes. For a heartbeat, I forgot how to breathe. The officiant began speaking, but before he got through his first lines, I heard gravel crunching behind the barn, a sharp grinding stop, a car door slamming, then another, then a voice I knew too well. Ethan, what the hell is going on here? Mark's voice carried across the yard like a slap. Guests turned. Chairs creaked. Someone gasped. I closed my eyes for 1 second, just one, to steady the flare of heat in my chest. When I opened them, Mark, Karen, and Lily were storming toward the ceremony. All three overdressed as if they expected paparazzi to pop out of the hay bales. Karen's mascara was already smudged as if she'd practiced crying in the car. Mark's tie was crooked. Lily held her phone up like she was live streaming the whole damn thing. Ava's fingers tightened around mine. Jack moved first. He stepped in front of them, blocking the aisle. "You're late," he said flatly. "Wedding's started." Karen pushed past him with a trembling gasp. "We weren't invited, Jack, our own son's wedding. Do you know how humiliating this is?" Henry stepped forward, slow but unshaken. "Karen," he said, "this is not your moment." She spun on him. I am his mother." Henry didn't blink. "You forfeited that role when you dropped him on our driveway and drove off." The crowd rippled with whispers. Mark pointed a finger at me, eyes blazing. "You think you're some martyr now. We made you who you are. We saved you." Something in me snapped cleanly like a rope breaking. I stepped toward them, letting the silence build. "Saved me." My voice was calm, too calm. "You didn't save anything. You abandoned a grieving kid because he was inconvenient." Mark's jaw twitched. "Watch your tone." "Why?" I asked. "It's the only honest thing you've ever heard from me." Karen burst into tears. Loud, dramatic, shaky, her signature performance. "I can't believe you're doing this. In front of everyone. I raised you. I sacrificed? No, I cut in. You sacrificed the truth. You sacrificed accountability. You never sacrificed for me." Her tears froze mid-performance. And then Lily stepped forward, chin lifted, phone still recording. "Ethan, stop," she said with that same fake soft voice she used online. "This isn't healthy. You're acting unstable. You always do this, turn things into drama." A bitter laugh escaped me. "Drama. You spread rumors that I freeloaded. You told people I was a burden." "That's not," she started. I pulled out my phone and hit play. Her voice memo filled the air. Her laughing, planning how she'd turn the farm into a brand, how Dad would take over, how I'd deal like I always do. The guests stared. Someone covered their mouth. Another muttered, "Oh my God." Lily's face drained of color. "Delete that. You can't just—" "Truth doesn't disappear because you're embarrassed," I said. Mark stepped forward again. "We're your family. You owe us respect." I shook my head. "Family doesn't demand respect. They earn it." Silence fell. Heavy. Final. Ava slid her hand into mine. I felt her steadiness pour into me like heat. The officiant cleared his throat awkwardly. "Should we continue?" Before I answered, I looked at Mark and Karen, at Lily, at the three people who had shaped my scars more than my childhood ever could. "There are no seats for you," I said quietly. "Because you were never part of the life I built. No yelling, no theatrics. Just truth." Henry and Jack stepped beside me, one on each side. Margaret walked up behind them, spine straight. My real family. The people who stayed. Karen made one last shaky sound, half sob, half disbelief. Mark muttered something under his breath. Lily lowered her phone cheeks, blazing with humiliation. They left the same way they'd always left, blaming everyone but themselves. When they were gone, when the murmur of whispers settled, when Ava's eyes met mine, with that steady, knowing warmth, the officiant raised his book again. "Shall we begin?" I let out a breath I'd been holding for 15 years. "Yeah," I said, "let's begin." And under the lights, under the whispers of a crowd that had just witnessed the truth unfold, under the steady gaze of the people who'd rebuilt me piece by piece, I finally stepped into a life that was mine. Not theirs. Mine. That night after the ceremony ended, and the last string light flickered against the cool wind, Ava and I drove out to the house still under construction. The foundation was solid now, the frame mostly finished, the windows, just outlines of empty space catching the moonlight. The field behind it whispered with crickets and the faint rustle of dry grass. It was quiet, the kind of quiet I used to fear, but now felt like a promise. Ava walked ahead of me, her dress gathered in one hand, stepping into the hollow doorway where our home would be. I followed boots crunching over scattered wood dust and the metallic smell of fresh nails. The air inside was sharp with sawdust and strangely comforting. I could picture our future here more clearly than ever. She turned back and rested her forehead against my chest. "You okay?" she whispered. I nodded. "Yeah. Better than I thought." Outside, I could still see the faint glow of headlights disappearing down the road, the direction where Mark, Karen, and Lily had sped off hours earlier. I wondered what story they were telling now, what version of tonight they'd spin to make themselves the wounded heroes again. But the difference was stark and simple. No one believed them anymore. Earlier that evening, while guests moved between tables, Henry had pulled me aside, slipping a thick envelope into my hand. After the honeymoon, he said, "Read it when you're steady." Inside were legal papers, his signature beside mine on a document that changed everything. It confirmed what I'd suspected the past few years. Every time he watched me take on more responsibility, he had already written my name into part of the farm's ownership, quietly, permanently. Long before my parents decided to come crawling back, they always thought power came from controlling you, he said softly. Turns out yours came from walking away. Standing in the skeletal frame of my future home, I realized something. Tonight was not payback. It was merely the beginning of shifting the balance. They thought the empty wedding chairs were the consequence. They had no idea the real consequences were still coming, slow, quiet, inevitable. Sometimes revenge isn't loud. Sometimes it's just living a life they can't twist their way into. Ava slipped her hand into mine. Ready to go home, I looked out at the dark field, the silhouette of Henry's farmhouse, glowing in the distance, and felt something steady settle in my chest. "Yeah," I said. "This time I finally am." If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, hit that subscribe button. Your support helps these stories reach the people who need them most. And trust me, Ethan's story isn't finished. Families like his don't disappear quietly. They circle back, they scheme, they push. The question is, what happens when the person they used to control finally holds all the power? So drop a comment, tell me where you're watching from, and stay tuned for the next chapter. Because this story, it's far from over.